Hey yo guys, what's up and welcome back to Toe Tags Metal Reviews, and today we're getting our final review of Swallowed by Hell by Morbid. So, cool thrash album, decided to check it out, spun it all week long, and I gotta say that the week didn't go that well for me, okay? Unfortunately, right out of the gate, I think my early first impressions of this album were not long-lived. I can say that. Now, the album has some strong points, okay? It's just overall thrashy goodness, okay? Not disappointed in that aspect of it, but if you watched our new release video where we talked about our first impressions, I think the stuff that stood out the most then is still the stuff that's the strongest now. So you take songs like Bloody Floors, which is track number 3, and Fear Incarnate, which is track number 5. Those two songs I think are still the strongest songs on the album, mostly because they have interesting intros that grab you, and for that reason my attention's able to stick with it longer. That's kind of how I felt about it. So Bloody Floors has that really chunky bass line at the beginning, and then Fear Incarnate has, it kind of starts with some weird like people screaming and like chaos pandemonium, and then you have the machine gun drum intro.
Well, you know, you mentioned that about the intros. I'm curious, what do you think of Psychosis, the last track? Because that has a discernible intro as well.
It does, and I was going to get to that because Psychosis is another track that grew on me, but I still think that, I just wanted to point out that those two other tracks are still like basically the peak of this album, okay? So moving on to Psychosis, which is the last track on the album. Yes, it has an interesting intro, and this song I felt was just a banger, just a really good album outro, and it does this thing where it repeats the riff. It's kind of like it got a riff at the beginning, and then at the end it repeats the riff over and over again, fades into outro. And normally I would be like, that's kind of annoying, but for some reason I was really gravitating towards it on this track. I don't know why, but I actually really liked it, and I liked the way it just kind of rode this riff, and it was there's kind of like a siren type of vibe to it.
Yeah.
Like a sense of emergency.
Even when there's like the literal siren at the beginning.
Yeah, so I dig that, man. I thought that was pretty good, and I thought it was just a really good album closer. Another song I thought was good, but I have an issue with it, is track number 2, Swallowed by Hell, title track. So I thought this was a good track. Nothing particularly wrong with it. It's enjoyable. My issue though is its placement, because it has this kind of talking intro.
Yeah.
I just feel like that's like either album opener or like mid-album. Having that as song 2 kind of felt weird.
I see what you're saying.
It felt weird because you got Rise from the Ashes, which again, titled, that name alone sounds like an intro track, right? It's a good intro track. But then right after that, you got this little talking bit, and then it leads into the title track. I felt like that talking bit, stuff like that should happen a little bit later in the album or at the very beginning. Not a huge gripe, but it's
That'd be a cool way to start it.
Yeah, I mean,
like that.
Something that we consider on this channel when reviewing albums is track placement. Does the album have a good flow? Did they make a good choice of where they put the tracks? And in this case, I feel like they didn't. It's not a huge issue, but that's what it is. As far as the rest of the songs, Burn Pit, Fuck Them All, Bleed Them Dry, Pine Tuxedo, Killer Instinct, those songs, again, good thrash, but that's it. Like, there wasn't a lot notable for those songs for me. The biggest takeaway probably is the solos. They're good, but the downfall with them is they're all just very noodly. There's not a lot of character there. There's not a lot of flair. It's just a lot of noodly, soloing, which is fine. I like that, but I don't like it on every song of an album. So I was a little bit disappointed with the album through the week. It wasn't horrible. I've heard worse. But, it had some highlights. I don't know. What did you think?
Well, unfortunately, I kind of felt similar for this album that you did, but I think this album is kind of similar to maybe a few other albums we've kind of checked out on the channel this year, where it's great in a vacuum. So, and I kind of, When I first heard this album last week, I'm like, whoa, these guys are crazy. Like, oh my God, the energy's crazy. And I kind of noticed near the end, like, they're all kind of doing the same thing. But I also kind of consider, like, you put this album on, the first track you hear, no matter which one you start with, is going to be kick-ass thrash metal. It's just the more you listen to the album is when you're going to start to get tired because you realize it gets repetitive. But that's just a testament to, like, these guys write kick-ass thrash. It's just, the pace of this album is just one song. They don't really change up much. And there are some songs that change the pace a tiny bit, but only for small sections. And I would prefer an entire song to be that, so that you could break up the pace. So the faster stuff feels better, feels stronger, and more significant. I still like Fear Incarnate, one of the best songs on the album. I liked it on the last one. This one's got a sick drum intro. There are some slower grooves in it. I like that. A really small thing, and I love when this happens with albums, a really tiny thing that stood out at the 2-minute mark of Fuck Them All. The bass does this cool thing. It kind of goes up the octave before the next section.
Okay, yeah.
Kind of like what you'd hear Steve Harris do.
Okay.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it does that, a few times in the song. I like that. And every time I heard it, I'm like, yeah, that part's cool. And that's the kind of thing we really like to see in albums, where it's like the tiny things that stand out.
Yeah.
Like that, right? But I got to a point where a lot of songs were blending together, or it just felt like the same song. And it's unfortunate because kick-ass thrash, like I said, amazing in a vacuum. But when you hear them over and over, you hear the same wild double kick going. This guy's got ridiculous stamina. You hear kind of the same riffs almost, not identical, but similar.
The styles there.
The styles are there. The vocals are the same. The solos, there wasn't really any solo that really jumped out at me at all.
No.
There was no song where I'm like, fuck, that was a solo. Just, that didn't happen at all. Bleed Them Dry is another one that has this cool slower groove, which is only really used for the verses. And I think this should be the base of the song. It should be centered around that, as opposed to it just being verses only. I think if you focus it on that, you get a great pace breaker. And that's what this album needs and never really got. So, throughout this album, I was kind of like, I was finding weird kind of rating songs, thinking like rating them on a bit of the lower side, because I'm like, well, these songs individually are really good, but all together, they just really kind of just feel the same.
They don't complement each other.
They don't really complement each other much. Like, they could have just released every single song as a single, and people would have enjoyed them because they would be listening to every single song out of context.
That's right.
Out of context, every song is great.
That's a tricky thing about albums like this.
It is really hard because every song is cool on their own, but you put them together and there's like really no variety.
Yeah, we're not reviewing songs, we're reviewing the whole piece, the whole package. Right?
Exactly. So that's what's difficult about an album like this. And another thing that I noticed throughout reviewing this album, which I've never really considered before, is that I feel like albums like this are the reason why old school thrash is usually 2 to 3 minute songs. Because I found some of these songs would drag a little bit. They get upwards of like 4 to 5 minutes, which is average typical song length. But for thrash, these are on the longer side, especially because I think some of them push 6.
I mean, there's a lot of thrash songs back in the day that are old, that are long.
There are. But even so, I feel like this style of thrash is like 2 to 3 minutes and then out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It can be.
Like the super duper speed craziness are usually the shorter ones, unless there's like a big kind of like composition behind them, which this album doesn't have that.
So taps into progressive territory kind of thing.
Exactly. And because this album doesn't do that, it fits into like the kind of just burner territory.
So the songs feel too long, is what you're saying.
They kind of felt like it was dragging. This is a 10-track album that feels long.
It's 46 minutes.
Which
feels
honestly,
like, for an album like this, it might have been more palatable as like a 35-minute album.
Yeah.
Like, shave a couple minutes off each song, or shave a minute off each song kind of thing.
Or even just cut a few tracks.
Yeah, then you're getting to EP territory at that point.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, we've seen LPs like at 8 tracks before.
Yeah.
But
either way, it felt long.
Yeah, so
that's the point.
It kind of felt long, and it kind of really made me think like, maybe these songs are better suited for like 2 to 3 minutes. But I guess that's just because of the way they're made, and I feel like they kind of just keep going. And like I said, 46 minutes, 10 tracks, and it felt long. And I just found that so strange. Like, this is not that long of an album. It's more so average length.
Yeah.
But it kind of just felt like it was dragging, which is unfortunate, but that's how I felt.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess we'll rate it. I think, this album's good for thrash fans. I think it's a good overall thrash album. I think one of the highlights on the album is the bass presence. I think there's the bass presence is really nice on this album. The guitaring, good. I think the vocals and the drums are where the album kind of falls the flattest. Not that they're bad.
That's funny considering this drummer is a machine.
He's a machine, but the drumming felt stagnant. It's like the machine just doesn't have any other options. Like it has an on button and an off button. That's basically what it feels like. I mean, that's oversimplifying it. There's obviously lots of cool stuff he's doing. Modern drummers do all kinds of fancy stuff, but it was one of the weaker aspects of the album for me, as well as the vocals, because they just didn't go anywhere. They didn't really stand out in any way. So yeah, with a couple tracks that I like, the rest of it being just average at best, I'm gonna give it a 5. That's my score.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it didn't take long for this album to kind of start to drag on me, but like you said, great thrash album for thrash fans. If that's the kind of style of music you like, then this definitely has exactly what you want to hear, especially for this band being from the late 80s.
Yeah.
But it's very repetitive and the songs are kind of long, but in a vacuum, the songs are great. Like individually, yeah, it's awesome, but altogether, it's just like one thing. So I'm actually gonna give a slightly higher score of 5.5 because if I I could see myself putting this album on later on in the year and loving it at first, and then as the more I listen to it, kind of remember, oh yeah, it's kind of all the same thing. But
yeah,
that's the bit of virtue that this album has, is that it has something awesome. They just they just copy and paste it 10 times.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah, there's a couple songs that go to the playlist too, and when those songs come on shuffle, or for example, they're gonna stand out.
Exactly.
They're gonna stand out. So it's got some power. It's got some pluses. Anyways, guys, that's it for this review. So that's a 5 from me and a 5.5 from TV Fish for Swallowed by Hell. So that's it. Leave your thoughts down below and let us know what you guys thought of this album after a week of listening to it. Do you agree with our scores or not? Subscribe if you guys are new to the channel. I'm Vile Self.
I'm TV Fish.
We'll see you guys in the next one. Keep those heads banging.